Many people I come across have a Kiwisaver fund with ABC provider, and they've chosen maybe 1, 2, 3 fund with that provider, and they think they're set up for retirement. When I ask them why they chose that provider and fund, they usually say because they have low fees, or they like their ethics and philosophy, or they seem to be doing well, so we went with them. Some even just went with their bank because it was convenient. But when I ask them whether they've checked the risk versus return performance of their fund, they say, I don't know what that is. You see, Kiwisaver providers usually market their funds around their strengths, not their weaknesses. And their strengths could be one of the popular topics like high returns, low fees, good ethical or responsible investment strategies, or just convenience. Let's put aside most of the popular topics for now and put our attention towards how to truly compare returns. Firstly, let's reverse our thinking and do a U-turn for a second to understand risk management and performance. Risk management describes the techniques a Kiwisaver fund provider applies to mitigate the risk and volatility of the fund. These strategies influence how much your savings may go down when big market events such as the global financial crisis or COVID-19 came around. We call the percentage of fund has gone down a drawdown. So if you have $100,000 in your Kiwisaver at this point and it falls to $82,000 at this point, we'd call this an 18% drawdown. Higher volatility means bigger drawdowns for your Kiwisaver, particularly when market cycles naturally go through bigger recessionary phases every few years. Some growth fund drawdowns were 30% plus when COVID-19 hit, while the ones with good risk management achieved less than 20%. In my opinion, for most people, the Kiwisaver providers who don't have sound risk management strategies are simply the ones to avoid, because the volatility can cause extra stress that can easily influence people into making irrational decisions with their savings. Decisions that can lose them a lot of money. And the more savings they have, the more irrational the decisions can be because of the emotional ties to their money. Unfortunately, it's just human nature, and this is how markets work. Those providers who have good risk management when markets are going down usually have excellent management for milking the gains when markets are going up in the following growth expansion phase. And this leads to returns being far better even though the risk has been mitigated and limited, instead of returns being only okay with open-ended risk and volatility and drawdowns. Focusing on returns without understanding risk is why so many jumped from growth to conservative funds when the COVID-19 drawdown hit, and this unfortunately solidified their losses. You need to compare apples versus apples with the risk of the fund, not just apples versus apples for the returns of the fund. Now, this chart shows the last 10 years of risk versus return performance for various Kiwisaver providers and their different funds. The fund providers are being blanked out as these metrics are updated every 3 months, and I don't want people running out and changing their funds based on what could be old data by the time they watch this video. The different colors represent the different risk allocations. On the right, we have growth funds, which have more exposure to volatile markets like share markets, so they have a bigger volatility with a bigger return potential. Then we have balanced funds that have less exposure than growth funds to more volatile markets. And then we have moderate funds with less exposure again. And finally, conservative funds, which have the least exposure to more volatile markets. And with that, they have lower volatility with smaller returns. When assessing for risk versus return, ultimately we want a combination of a left and high fund, whether we're in a growth, balanced, moderate or conservative fund. Left and high indicates a Kiwisaver fund and provider that's performed really well over a very long period of time. Or we can choose a mix of allocations with specialist Kiwisaver providers if you're trying to really tailor your drawdown risk better than the default growth, balanced, conservative fund options allow. You'll also notice the further right you go towards the growth funds, the bigger the spread is of the results between these providers. And this indicates that the more exposed you are to volatile markets like share markets, the broader the range of results are likely to be across the different Kiwisaver providers. So if you fit a balanced or growth risk profile, you need to be ultra aware of the risk versus return performance when you go to choose a fund, because the consequences of choosing the wrong fund can stack up to be a lot of money over time. And here's the thing, when you start to understand risk management and performance, you then start to think, well, hey, if I'm in a growth fund like this one here with ABC provider, and the risk is the same as this one up here with XYZ provider, then I'm actually sacrificing what I could be making in returns with XYZ. And then you start thinking, well, over time, how much does 3% in annual compounding returns actually add up to? And how much will that difference compound to over, say, 25 years? So let's jump over to a calculator to work it out. Let's imagine we have a couple who are both 40 years old, and they each have $75,000 saved in Kiwisaver so far, and they're each earning $100,000 a year, saving 3% of their salary into Kiwisaver, and with their employer contributing 3% as well. For example purposes, let's imagine their incomes didn't increase with inflation and nothing else changed. Their projected balances for Kiwisaver by age 65 total just under $1.6 million. But if we apply an increased average return of 3%, like we saw for a better performing fund, the projected balances total over $2,850,000, and the difference being over $1,260,000 extra for their retirement. Now, let's imagine they're both 50 instead of 40 and still suit a growth fund, taking into account their risk preference and all of their other financial plan considerations. We start with a projection by 65 of $940,000 and get over $1,330,000 by applying the increased return average. The difference is over $390,000 extra for their retirement. Now, the numbers aren't as attractive as when you're 40 because you have less time in the market, but it's still certainly better than what could have been. And what about if you're in your 30s or even 20s? Well, this is really where the magic can happen. Average performing projections of 7% annually show to be around $2,430,000 by age 65. And if we apply the 10% return, we get close to $5,530,000 by age 65. The difference being over $3,090,000 extra for their retirement. And lastly, if you're lucky enough to catch on to this concept when you're in your 20s, the difference could be over $4.8 million extra to retire on. So whatever your age bracket, it's about minimizing risk and maximizing returns and time in the market that can make all the difference to your retirement nest egg. If you did increase your contributions from 3 to 6%, we're looking at a very different picture indeed for your nest egg savings.